Welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery for tonight's virtual tour and talk for the exhibition A Printmaking Constellation, guest curated by Tony Rosati, featuring the artwork of 5 stellar printmakers, including Justine Ditto, Caren Friedman, Hayley Murphy, Kaela Pinizzotto, Tony Rosati, and Raffi Zarzatian. So thank you all for coming, and Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And the first thing I want to say is a big thank you to Michael and Tina for bringing this opportunity my way. I was just delighted to be asked to do this. And in doing so, Mike also said to me, you need a theme and you need a structure for this. And so this was months ago, I think around May. And so I really thought about it a long time, and the first theme or title that I thought of was a printmaking bouquet, as I think some of you know. But one of the first things that came to mind when Mike said a structure was I certainly wanted this to be about printmaking, although Mike didn't say it had to be. And then when I thought of, well, what printmakers could be part of this, the other thing I thought of was, well, what if you dedicate each artist to a medium, or ask an artist who certainly has work that is dedicated to a medium? So then it was a matter of what mediums to think of. And I started with the basic 3, the crux of most printmaking curriculum at schools, and that is relief, intaglio, and lithography. But we all know that printmaking is comprised of mediums way beyond that. And some of the mediums that we work in or know of are not so familiar to most people. So one of them that I think needed to be highlighted was collagraphy. And then another one was monotype. From there, it was a matter of who the stars would be in this printmaking constellation, but it was first a printmaking bouquet with flowers, and then it transformed to, I think Mike suggested, buffet with food, and then it transformed to medley, and then in the end, constellation seemed like a reasonable thing to do. So you all know who you are, but I'll just start with just a little blurb about each one of you. When it came to screen printing, also known as serigraphy, I thought of Hayley. And one of the reasons I thought of Hayley was because Hayley employs one of the most simple and basic screen printing stencil methods, and that is paper stencils. And it's at a time when so many things are done photographically. I thought Hayley uses a simple system for very sophisticated results in both shape and color. And so I thought that would underscore the degree to which you can push a simple stencil system. When it came to etching, which I almost took for myself because that's mostly what I do, but my most recent work is monotype, I thought of Raffi. And Raffi's work came to mind because he does focus on etching, and because there's always been a really consistent theme to his work, and that is it's about family, or one could say relationships between people, and also about Armenian culture. But he embellishes all of that with hand coloring. So then when it came to relief printmaking, most people understand relief printmaking by the way of a lino cut or a wood cut. But there are lots of different relief mediums. A medium that was the mainstay of relief printmaking during the 19th century was wood engraving. And I thought I really want to highlight that. And the person who came to mind was Kaela, who took to wood engraving like a duck to water, I might say. And it's a medium that's not commonly known, and in the 19th century, it was started by an artist named Thomas Buick, but it became the mainstay of reproducing images in catalogs, magazines, and newspapers. And you can see such things at the Library Company in Philadelphia if you go there. Wood engraving was a way of getting very fine detail in a relief printing method, which was great because when it came to printing text with letterpress, it was the same printing system. It only stopped being used almost overnight as a commercial medium with the advent of lithography and in particular photography. Artists then who were doing illustrations for magazines and newspapers almost went out of business overnight. And it came into the hands of artists who used the medium for the beauty of the medium and for the personal expression it offered them. And so I thought that wood engraving would be a really good medium to include. And then one that is really sometimes very under the radar as well is collagraphy. And collagraphy, well, the name collagraph really didn't get coined until 1950 by an artist whose name is Glenn Alves. And I thought, well, who do I know who really does excellent collagraphs? And the first person that came to mind is my friend from many years, Caren Friedman. And I remembered her work from a show she had at UArts maybe 10 years ago. Caren, you could correct me later. And so I contacted Caren and she was happy to participate. And her work is generally small format, and the body of work that we have in this show, I think, is based on a trip to Alaska, which Caren, I'm sure, will elaborate on. Then the last medium was lithography. And I know a lot of lithographers, but one who came to mind is Justine, because Justine has been working as a master printer for the Brodsky Center at PAFA and has been working in lithography for a long time. Her work is mysterious, it's often very colorful, and it uses sometimes very web-like forms of compositional structures. And I thought that it would be great to have Justine on board. So everyone accepted the invitation. And then the last medium was my work, which is now mostly monotype. And what I've been doing recently is really influenced by the work of Mary Frank, an American artist who started out as a ballerina and then a sculptor and then later a printmaker. And when we get to talk about work specifically, I can address more of that. And so I think that probably from here, I don't know where Tina is, but we can start with one of the artists and they can speak to, I think, as a prompt, what you like so much about the medium you're working in, and if you wish, when you came to first use it, or however you would like to elaborate. So you want to start, I don't know, Tina, we could start with Kaela right in the middle there. So Kaela, you can speak to the body of work or when you first started doing it or however you wish to go.
Sure. Well, I first learned wood engraving, I think it was my second year at PAFA. I was in one of Tony's classes. And I had taken a lot of different printmaking classes at the time, but as soon as I started with this, with wood engraving, I just immediately fell in love with the medium. I feel like you can work on a very small scale with this type of medium, which I love. I love working on a very small scale. And the type of material that it is, end grain wood, it really allows you to work very detailed as well as small. And I love making little details too. And the whole process of wood engraving is very meditative for me. You kind of get lost in it when you're carving the woodblock. But this series of wood engraving prints, it's an ongoing series, and basically it captures my love for nature and landscapes, and also my love for light. And the type of light that I like is a natural light. Usually people call it like the golden hour during the day. Just a really like beautiful raking light that creates a lot of different shadows and contrasts and stuff. And this series basically captures just my love for that type of light. And I felt the medium of wood engraving also helps with that very like visceral or intimate feeling that I feel when I see this type of light. And yeah,
Kayla, I have a question.
sure.
So what's the difference between wood engraving and wood cut, like a regular wood cut?
For wood cuts, usually people use like pine board, and that type of wood, the grain goes in one direction. And whenever you cut against the grain, the wood tends to splinter. But for wood engraving, these blocks, they're made of different pieces of wood put together. All the grain of each of these small pieces of wood go in different directions. And because of that, it kind of allows you to make marks and carvings in any direction that you want to go in without having to worry about the wood splintering. And it's a very tough, really hard wood. Even just the littlest mark will show up in the print. So it really allows you to get these really tiny details.
And are you using any different tools than a regular woodcut to make these?
Yeah, actually, they're called burins. They're just the very tip of these tools are sharp. But they come in different types. There's some that are more rounded, like create like a more rounded mark when you carve with them. There's some that are more of a square mark. There's all kinds of tools, but yeah, they're a little bit different than the typical wood carving tools that you would use for just like wood blocks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So can we move to Raffi's work right now?
Hello, everybody.
Oh.
So the printmaking method that my artworks are in is intaglio, which is a method that utilizes metal plates, most commonly copper and zinc. And there's a variety of ways that you can create an image on the plate. The way that I primarily use is through placing an acid ground, such as asphaltum, on top of the plate, removing that ground in the areas where you want the image to appear, and then etching it in an acid formula so that the lines appear in the plate, and then you can rub ink into those lines and print it. I actually was introduced to this method by Lisa Hamilton and then studied later with Tony. And I loved it from the moment that I started Italio printmaking. And pretty soon after starting it, actually, is when I started making watercolor editions. My father was a poet, and so I grew up with a lot of works of William Blake and seeing William Blake's prints in some of his poetry books, which were also Italio prints using hand watercolor editions. And so I always knew I wanted to try that out on a couple of Italio prints when I went into the first class. And just from the get-go, I realized how much I like the meditative rhythm of creating these watercolor editions. So both the rhythm of printmaking for Italio, the soaking the paper, coming back, inking the plate, taking out the paper, blotting it, and then running it through, you get into a very nice meditative rhythm with that. And then taking those prints once they dry and getting into a nice meditative rhythm with just coloring in one color at a time through the editions is something that I immediately was drawn to and really greatly enjoyed. And then also just the ability to get incredibly fine lines and detail in Italio, especially the etching Italio with the acid, is something I really enjoy. And the fact that with the ground, it's a fairly forgiving medium because I like to work freehand, even on my prints. And that's something that a lot of print methods don't allow you to do as forgiving. So like lithography, you make the mark very hard to get rid of. And same with woodcut. You make the cut, you can't really fill it back in. So it's very hard to go back on things. So you have to have a very good master drawing. But when you have the ground, if you make a light enough scratch into the ground just to remove the metal, you could fill it back in with another ground if you decide you don't like the way that looks. And if the mark still appears, you can just smooth it out. So it's a much more forgiving method than some of the other methods that can also achieve a very fine line. And I think that that's why I ended up really being drawn to it and really, really enjoying this printmaking method.
Raffi, may I ask you about your imagery?
Absolutely.
Yeah, where does it come from and what's your thrust here with the subjects you choose?
Yeah, well, I guess it comes from two large places. One is, of course, my Armenian heritage. My family is from Western Armenia, which is now considered modern day Turkey. And we come from a variety of towns in Western Armenia. And a lot of the imagery has to do with kind of trying to find a home in a place that no longer exists, and trying to kind of bring back the memory of Western Armenia and the feeling of Western Armenia as somewhere that no longer exists, except like in the hearts and the minds of those who ended up surviving, the Armenian genocide and coming all over the world, but my family to America. So that's obviously one of the large influences in my work. It is predominantly Armenian, but another one is kind of just love for humanity and culture and community. So I do a lot of marketplaces. I grew up on an open air marketplace, the Italian market in Philadelphia. And I always have loved just very big, bustling centers of activity for humans. I love the way that they interact with each other, the colors, the conversations. I really love the liveliness and the life and the intimacy that comes with these open air markets, especially, but any human community space area in the world. So I would say that Armenia, like culture and humanity, are like the three things that I really try to convey and depict in my work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So could we segue to Caren Friedman's work? And Caren, I don't know that we ever talked about when you first became interested in collagraphs.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I didn't actually learn collagraphs when I was in art school. I didn't even know it existed as an option. I had done relief printmaking and intaglio printmaking, but when I got a job at teaching printmaking at Bucks County Community College, all of my students were doing collagraphs because the person who had just retired, who I had replaced, was the collagraph queen. Her name was Selma Bortner. And so I had to learn, I basically learned from my students, as many educators know we learn so much from our students. But the thing that I love about collagraphs is that it deals with both surfaces, intaglio and relief, and you can kind of get a very rich image. And I just love the process of making them. It's kind of three-dimensional. There's the physicality of the surface that is I can get lost in, and so I experimented a bit with collagraphs. I didn't do a deep dive until maybe 2010, and then I kind of just went full, just full steam ahead with them. But this particular body of work happened while I was on sabbatical in 2019, which kind of coincided with COVID. And I had taken a workshop and was introduced to this new material that I'd never heard of called Sintra. And it's a PVC. It's sort of a cross between foam core and poster board almost. It's very smooth and you can cut it. And so that led me to creating shaped plates. And I had been doing watercolors of rocks. Actually, this series began with rocks from Alaska, but this particular grouping was more inspired by the stone walls that I saw in Ireland. When I was traveling in Western Ireland, there were all of these dry stone walls where you could see the sky behind them, and they were kind of, but probably an accumulation of experience. Just I have anyone who knows me knows I have a lot of rocks. I've traveled a bit. And the other thing about this that, you know, looking at it now, I teach 2D design, and in a weird way, I was influenced by my own my own assignments, because this is, you know, very visual, very much about composition. So so anyway, that's kind of how it got started, and I enjoyed making them. It's not, I've never done shaped plates before. They're very stark because of, you know, because of the nature of the process. And it was kind of freeing, because normally when you do a collagraph or any kind of plate, you've made this commitment to this fixed plate, you know, a certain size. And in this particular case, I had all of these separate rocks that became characters that I could kind of move around and play with. So it's very enjoyable.
So Caren, I was wondering, how big are your editions? I think often collagraph plates wear out in a certain number of prints. I don't know if that's a factor with this material or not.
Oh, well, these are really one of a kind. I didn't do editions because I was just, each one was different. But these particular plates, because they're made with carborundum and modeling paste, and they have layers of acrylic on them, they're pretty durable. I had done another body of work that was based directly on the rocks that I had found in Alaska, and those were essentially dry points. I had used roulettes, and they didn't last very long. You know, I maybe got about 10 impressions, and then they kind of flattened out. But these seem to have more staying power. I'm not one for editions, quite frankly. I'll maybe do, you know, 3 the same, but mostly I like each one. I like variations, variable editions.
Sure. And many artists embrace the same point of view. So, Mike, I don't know if you have questions for Caren before we move on.
No, Caren covered everything, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
so then I think we could go to Hayley's work. And Hayley, you can speak to your interest in the medium, and how come you're so addicted to paper stencils, Hayley?
Well, it's actually Tony that introduced me to the paper stencil method in his lovely screen printing class, and I've always been drawn to the circle, and I found this beam compass in an art supply store so I could cut these lovely circles. And Tony gave us an assignment where we had to make a paper stencil screen print using 5 different colors. But I would try to work smart and not hard, and use a lot of transparent base in my ink. So I just printed with 3 colors and made 6, and that got the grade, so that was good. And so I started playing around with these transparencies in printmaking, and getting all these surprises from printing. So you get the secondary and the tertiary colors, and I loved the interaction of the colors, and play around with different papers. So with this piece, using the spiral, so I use the circle a lot, but I'd seen Hilma Clint show it. He'd used spirals a lot, and I was trying to think of another way that I could play around with printmaking. So the stencil maybe took about an hour to cut, and I've made so many pulls with these same stencils. You would take their it's freezer paper, so one side's shiny and the other side's paper, so you could draw the paper side and then cut, and the shiny side will stick to the screen, and then just pulling ink through there. So with the spiral motif, I was making the circle ones, and then this is the same spiral just repeated, and it just sort of layering and seeing what colors. So this has a lot of transparent base, and they're mostly inks straight out of the tub. just mixed with the transparent base. And some with this one in particular, some ones that would have lots of layers, it does get a bit nerve-wracking near the end. Like, should I do another color? Should I lay another one down? And hairdryer is my side buddy, who I've like in between pulls, I have to get the hairdryer out, I keep working, and I will but something like this, just add the new color to the screen without cleaning the screen, just put like, with the purples and the blues, and just keep. And then I pull a lot with newsprint. They can make their own types of prints. I keep all of those as well. They have some more there was interesting things that can happen without thinking. Was this is quite methodical, but I've just kind of lay it down and see what happens. There's not, don't overly plan stuff. There's like an initial idea, and then just see where it goes when the printmaking starts.
Oh. Hayley, I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit to something that I think you told me, and if I'm remembering it incorrectly, you will correct me. But I think one of the things that I thought you implied was that paper stencils are simple and direct, but they also suit your lifestyle because you don't have to spend a lot of time in the exposure room with photo processes. And
right.
It's almost like that was also an incentive to stay with the medium. How good's my memory on that?
Yeah, it's way more immediate. So I'd learned the exposure room stuff with the emulsion and things like that in a previous class with Lisa Hamilton, which I enjoyed. But the paper stencil, I love the immediacy of it, and because I like working with simple geometric shapes and with the layering, it was much quicker. And so all that other process, it just cut all of that out. So with these ones on the screen now, if you took your head, I was thinking about light shows. I've been to a lot of concerts at some music festivals over the summer. I was really inspired by the light show. So this was thinking about all of those. Where I was making this as part of a bigger series. But then I loved how these came together, these big stars. I was thinking about space, and I like working on the black paper, and this laying up of the white really had this glow on the black paper. The simplicity of the paper stencils, I just love it. And I love the sharp edge, the thicker edge that you get around the paper stencil. Like it's a little bit thicker, and sometimes depending which pressure you would put on either side when we're pulling the ink down with the squeegee, we can kind of play around with the thickness of the ink and get some interesting things to happen, and depending if you're flooding the screen first, you're putting ink on the screen first and then pushing it through, or just one pull or multiples. I'm sort of experimenting with that on the paper as well, just seeing what happens. And kind of like the surprise of lifting up the screen, like, okay, that's what we're working with. Get the hairdryer out and then keep going. And sometimes you go too far. I remember asking Ron, how do you know? I'm worried about going too far. And he's like, well, how do you know if you don't go there? So just keep layering and keep going. You're too scared to layer anymore.
So is a serigraph a form of screen printing, or is it different? Or
Yeah, it's the same. It's just another name.
I see. So it can be interchangeable, the name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Tony will tell you a story. He's got all the info.
I can add a little bit to that. Really, there's three names associated with screen printing. There's silk screen, there's serigraphy, and then there's screen print. And that's pretty much the chronology of it. The medium began in the 20th century, and it started out as a commercial medium. And when artists turned to it, they found that her work wasn't very well received. And there was the first curator of the Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art was Carl Zagrosser. And he came to know the local artists working in that medium, silk screen because the mesh was silk. They complained to him that there wasn't much interest in the images they were making. His response was, well, it has a commercial, and I'm paraphrasing, it has a commercial stigma. You need a different word for what you're doing in fine art. And he literally said to them, come back tomorrow and I'll have a new word for you. So they came back and he said, you're making serigraphs. And sera is a Greek root word that could mean screen, silk, or mesh. So it's a euphemistic way of saying the same thing. But there was an artist by the name of Anthony Valonis who was part of that group at that time. And Anthony Valonis said, well, we have to have one caveat attached to what makes a serigraph. And that is, it needs to be made with oil paint, not ink. And to me, when I read that, it was kind of expressing an inferiority complex about the medium, and that if we use oil paint in that revered oil painting medium, that somehow that's going to make serigraphies more interesting to people. So the serigraph term was coined. It really didn't do much until Ben Shahn, Sylvia Wald, Sister Mary Carita Kent turned to the medium. But the real turning point was after World War II. All the silk went to World War II in the form of parachutes. And after World War II, the mesh became synthetic meshes. And then with Warhol's 1960 Brillo and Campbell soup cans, the whole stigma attached to serigraphy or silkscreen was gone. And more appropriately, it's screen print, but both terms, silkscreen and serigraphy, are still used. And so it seems to get confusing, as is with other art terms, but that's the basic history of it. So, but we should turn now to Justine's work. And Justine has been working for the Brodsky Center. Justine, as all of us, work in many mediums, but the work in this show highlights lithography. So, Justine, how would you like to speak to that? You became interested in lithography, and your mysterious imagery is going to remain unrevealed, or you're going to reveal something?
I guess we'll see. Yeah, I mean, the same story as pretty much everybody here, and maybe that's just how printmaking works. Is when I started it, I was like, this is magical. So lithography is, it's a planographic medium, so it's flat, there's no carving or creating reliefs. It's maintained through opposing chemical states in a limestone or a aluminum plate that's made to emulate the limestone surface. But you draw on it with crayons and you use washes. So more than any other medium, it is direct drawing. And that's what I really love about it. And even though I think lithography is probably considered one of the more difficult mediums, and it has a lot of steps, I apologize for any background noise. I find that you can do so much more with it as a drawing medium. And it's almost like a visceral drawing medium, because you're dealing with a stone, like a literal rock, and these grease pencils and the way that the material builds up on the surface. So this piece is a fairly early lithograph that I did, and it was really like an homage to the stone, to the rock. And I wanted to make stones on a stone and let the texture of the limestone come through. And I was referencing images from ancient Spain and taking pieces from different objects and assembling them into my own portal. Yeah, I think in terms of content, a lot of my work is dealing with like visual overlaps between different kinds of content, like historical, architectural, organic, sometimes cosmic, and finding where they intersect, and they're often maybe a bit fantastical or dreamlike. I'm obviously very interested in mark making and line work, but I find that I'm following patterns and waves that I think are embedded in almost like a collective unconscious of experience, where like ocean waves resemble topographical formations, which resemble microcosms, and there's so much repetition that it's almost coming out in multiple manifestations. So I feel like my work is exploring how those things come together, and they're recognizable, but they're also a bit mysterious. And some of these works here are color works like this one, and those pieces were really a foray into experimenting with techniques and color. They were done during my time at the Tamarind Institute for Lithography, when I was really learning a lot of techniques and how to push myself. So I did a lot of color printing. I worked with a lot of photographic plates, mixtures of stones and ball grain plates. Yeah, this one, for example, is a white wash printed on top of a dark wash, with a crayon drawing underneath. And one of the other pieces to the left that has the yellow background is like a flat printed with a Xerox toner transfer image, and then a photo plate, but then the photo plate is dusted with iridescent powder. So these are all, like, this is a very experimental work for me, but at the time, during my time in New Mexico, I was really inspired by the desert landscape. So these works were really influenced by, yeah, like it's almost like a dreamlike state of what it was like to just be like entranced in the desert almost. Yeah.
Oh. And so would you say part of the intrigue is the layering of things?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think what I like about litho is I actually like all the steps in it, and I like all the alchemy in it that happens. Like I had written down, it's a visceral drawing plus alchemy, and then when you're printing, it's like this tenuous state that you're maintaining. But it has a very tactile quality, even though the prints end up looking so flat, which is kind of interesting. But it did match with my work, which involves a lot of layering and overlapping of patterns. But I think as much as that, my drawing practice has been influenced by the act of making lithographs.
Good. So, Mike, do you have any questions for Justine, or we'll go and I'll talk about a couple of things in my work.
His mic is muted. I think he's gonna get in there in a second.
He's muted. Or,
yeah.
Well, we can't hear him.
I had to get out of the way because this one's.
Oh, okay.
No, Justine covered it quite well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then I'll speak a little bit about some of the things that are in my work, but I really do have to go back to celebrate Mary Frank a bit. I can't remember when I first looked at her monotypes, and which are unique pieces, not necessarily lend themselves to replication. But one of the things that I noticed in Mary Frank's work from looking at a particular print titled Dinosaur, I think there were several dinosaur prints by Mary Frank that may have simply had numbers. She apparently used cutout shapes for dinosaur bones and colored them and put them on top of a flat field of color that was on a flat plate and printed it, and then would take the bone shapes off the plate and reposition them or add more color to them, and then run another print. So there were ghost shapes, like right in this particular picture, the fish on the top, there's a fish behind it. It's really a ghost shape of the fish to the right, the same cutout flipped over. I learned a lot from looking at her work, and I first started using that technique in demonstrations and teaching. And it took me a long time to claim this, but when I look back at my work in various different mediums, some of the series of prints that I do really come from demonstration prints that I did for students. And this fish in a print, a little fish in a print as a demonstration print, one day started showing up in my prints, whether it's an etching or a monotype. And to make a long story short, the time came when I deliberately decided to make a print that's about fish. But I hadn't done a large format one in that medium. And when I did one, I did another and another, and then I realized I had done what I thought of as an aquarium series of images. And it only recently dawned on me that I work in series very often. And I never really claimed that as part of the way I think as an artist until like the past year. Demonstration prints are often very simple because you can't have an audience of students watching you do something that's like watching grass grow. It has to be quick and to the point. So one of my demonstration prints early on was a snowman, which is 3 circles like Mickey Mouse. And then some years later, I was doing major prints in lithography and intaglio and in monotypes that were all about snowmen. And I really didn't connect it to the demo prints. And then these little fish prints, demo prints, I look back a year or so ago and realized that I've been putting fish in some of my own work. And now there's something fishy about my work right now. Anyhow, it's a medium I love because monotype is a way of getting ideas out relatively quickly, and it's a unique print, and you don't get into making multiples. And so these were prints and ghost prints, and so titles were Aquarium 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 4, one of the group isn't here, but that's where they came from. And I employ a very little bit of hand coloring on them. And hand coloring really in Western printmaking goes back to the 15th century with the first black and white woodcuts that were hand colored, because as soon as we had black and white images, there was a desire to have color, and the easiest way to get color on them was to paint them. And so hand colored images in any printmaking form have been ongoing. And so there's a little bit, I'd say 10% of these monotypes is hand coloring. As you all know, in printing, sometimes something doesn't print well, or something happens and distorts an image because of how the ink got pushed by the press. And sometimes that can be a very pleasant outcome or a little bit of a disappointment, but usually artists make the disappointment work. And so there's always that. And in all of these mediums that we've talked about today, there's a process, there's a sequence of steps to take, and there's always anticipation. And I always felt that people attracted to printmaking like the idea of working in a sequence of steps, and that anticipating the outcome is all part of the fun. It's like opening a Christmas or birthday present. You never know what you're going to get until it's opened. And there's a delay of gratification in getting to the opening of the present. And I think that's one of the things that most of us really enjoy about it. And I think the instant gratification people and impatient people don't end up being printmakers, but that's my opinion. But anyhow, I think it's a great exhibition and a great group of printmakers. And I know that Mike and Tina have an eclectic sense of aesthetic about what work they put in the gallery. But I believe that Mike has often said the most qualifying reason to have work in this gallery is that it be really good art. And I think that we have an exhibition of really good art. So, Mike, if you have anything you'd like to add or ask anyone anything, I guess now's the time.
Thanks, Tony. Just one thing. So speaking of demonstration, you're teaching a hand print monotype workshop here next Saturday. Can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah, I should first say that printmakers often make prints in a print shop where there are presses. But that's not the only way to make a print. Several mediums lend themselves to hand printing methods. And since we will not be in a fully equipped print shop, but in the studio that you use for artists to do workshops in, the monotype workshop will be all about hand printed methods. And I always like starting with a method that Paul Gauguin pioneered, that's often referred to as trace monotype, or more formally as Gauguin technique, where the act of drawing is the act of printing. And there are several spin-off methods to make different effects and things happen. But if you can draw, you can make a Gauguin trace monotype or a Gauguin monotype or a trace monotype. Then there are other ways to print by hand that include spooning an image, as many artists do with a woodcut or a relief print, where you have a painting on a flat surface, could be a plate, could be a Formica tabletop, and it's a matter of putting paper over it and rubbing the paper with a spoon to make pressure that pushes the paper into the ink and transfers the ink from the flat surface to the paper. One can go to another technique that is hand printing, where one could do a painting on a flat surface and put dampened paper over the painting. We don't spoon or rub dampened paper because the paper would rip apart and you wouldn't have a very pleasing outcome. But a simple roller, a rubber roller, can be used to roll over the back of a dampened sheet of paper to press it into the color. The color can be an oil-based ink, oil paint, or watercolor. So we'll be experimenting with all of those mediums a little bit on a small format, and it'll be a method that participants can take home with them and do not need to be in a print shop to get a monotype.
Do people need printmaking experience?
I'm sorry, Mike.
Do people need printmaking experience?
Oh, no, not at all. It's something that's very easy to learn and very easy to do. And anyone can do it, and they don't have to have any real drawing training, as long as they're bold and daring enough to make some marks on a piece of paper or to smear some ink around.
And the workshop will include a tour of the exhibition here, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And so, and I will remember some things that you all said, and I will be speaking to that at that tour as well.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you, everyone, for tonight. It was great to hear you speak about your work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Yeah, thank you.
You. So
the ex-
lovely.
The exhibition's up through November 19th. We hope everyone can come down and see it. If not, you can see everything on our website, ceruleanarts.com. And just remember, the best way to show an artist that you love their work is to buy it, right?